Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here in Barcelona. Project 1800, I should say very briefly, is about the 1800 children that die every single day as a function of the basic lack of wash. And it was a convening of 19 experts from civil society, United Nations, the corporate sector, regulators, in 4 work streams: finance, metrics, technology, and legal, that came together to ask 3 basic questions. And they're the same basic questions that you've asked here today. How do we think about this as a systems issue? Because clearly water and sanitation is a systems issue. Secondly, how do we do that in a cost-effective way? And 3, is there actually more value in terms of what we produce other than just a pure economic scenario? Could we actually make a market out of the problem? So could actually the $500 billion damage that is done to the economy, global economy every year, actually become a tradable opportunity? So that was the focus of what we're trying to do. Now, Churchill once said that if you need to understand the future, you have to go and look at the past. And this is one of my favorite pictures. I'm going to take you back to 1472 by Nicholas de Michelina. And it's found in Florence's Duomo. And on the left-hand side, he's pointing to the 9 circles of hell. And on the 7th circle of hell, you find blasphemers, sodomites, mass murderers, and bankers. Apologies to any bankers in the room. And on the right-hand side, he's looking at the dome, which you would be standing at, built by Brunelleschi, which was, of course, funded by Medici, the banker. And in this picture, you can see this whole relationship between for-profit and not-for-profit. I make my money over here, and then you do what the Medici did, grow most of the innovations of the Renaissance. They funded Galileo, Copernicus, etc. But there's a more interesting message behind here. One is this whole notion of how we think of for-profit, not-for-profit. UN institutions, NGOs on this side, the corporate sector on the other. One good, one morally bad. And the roots of this go back all the way back to 325, the Treaty of Nicaea. And it's hard-rooted in the Islamic religion, you see it as well. So this whole psychology about how we think about and how we approach these issues is very hardwired into our psychology. But the second, perhaps more interesting thing about the Medici is that they created the bond market. The bond market was the basis of the funding of the modern nation state. And when you look at history and you go back, if I look at 1095, the announcement of the Crusades, the rise of the church over the state, the funding mechanism that was the first bankers. They were the Templars. They created the first letters of credit, the first checkbooks, the first effective banking system, and indeed, by extension, the fiduciary models we take for granted. And if I roll a little bit further forward in history beyond the Medici that created the basis of the funding of the modern state, I come across my own country. You know, why did a small, wet, soggy island off the coast of Europe, half the economy of France, half the population, become the dominant power 100 years later? It was because we nicked from the Dutch a fine idea about central banking, and we had an effective taxation system that in part explains why we became one of the leading powers in the 19th century. And in the same way, Bretton Woods is a symbol of dominance, American dominance. All these things tell you that finance has had a turning point in history. And I put it to you, we've heard a lot of talk this morning about the SDGs. Let's be blunt. Are we at a similar turning point of history now? If you actually look at the SDGs, we are $2.5 trillion short annually. If there's another market crash, that adds another $1 trillion out to 2030 probably. That ignores the existential threats of climate. It ignores the existential threat that we're using 1.7 times resources, and ignores the fact that we have huge demographic liabilities hanging over our societies. So the Italian national debt isn't 132% people are worrying about, it's nearer 345%. The American unfunded pension and health liabilities are probably on the pension side somewhere between 3 to 9 trillion, and in healthcare could be 10 times that figure. I could go on. The reality is that if you think government is going to step forward, then that is simply not going to happen. And when we talk about 2.5 trillion conservatively, and we talk about the UN, it has $150 billion and probably declining in the scheme of things. And when you look how the foundation world is structured, it has $1 trillion, but only about 5% of that actually gets allocated every single year. And it's going to grow at about 3, 4, 5% if you run your maths through. So when we actually talk about SDGs with its 421 targets, indicators, and the SDGs themselves, and think on $150 billion that's going to get us to where we want to, you need to put some very good scotch in this very fine Barcelona water to believe that is going to happen. So as you were Penelope, I'm going to be Cassandra at this point. But there are positive signs. So the answer has to come from the private sector. And what you've seen is a huge growth of two elements. One is the growth and sophistication of civil society in the course of the last few years, this bottom-up movement with the realization that government cannot provide these answers. And the second element is when you look at companies, you will see, if you go back about 10 years, they had 5 to 10% of their earnings coming from the developing world. Now, as you'll see from those figures, they're up to 20, 30, 40%. Now, if you're at 5% and it's in the developing world, it's one of those nice social issues in Geneva or London. If, however, it's an environment when that's going to be where your earnings are, resiliency, for example, is your supply chain. Water becomes fundamental to what you do. So there are very clear trends why the corporate sector should engage. And there is the money there. I mean, let's take a look at the money here. What I've done here on the left and the right-hand side is to say these are the traditional sources of money, mostly flat in the scheme of things or highly fragmented. And these are what we consider to be impact investment, the blended value debate, which Kathleen will talk about, microfinance, green bonds, venture capital, and ESG. The interesting bit, I put it to you, is actually this bit in the middle. It is about aligning the $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion of foundation capital that is currently unaligned with social mission. It is around outcome models, where you make the problem the tradable market opportunity. There is capital in the developing world. It's one of these fallacies. There is actually $2 trillion that sits in local pension funds in local markets, slated to rise to $17 trillion by the year 2050. Impact investment models, I'll give you some examples on that stage. It goes beyond venture capital. Parabolic insurance, which is where you use the insurance market to manage risk in a far more interesting way. Islamic funding. There are trillions of dollars there. But the fault, dear Brutus, lies not amongst our stars. It lies in terms of how we currently manage it and do it. We throw silver bullets at the four horsemen of apocalypse as opposed to actually thinking how we work in, some people have used the word multi-stakeholder collaboration. These are the range of models, just to pick some random ones that do different things in impact investment. It's not a particular single asset class. There's a whole range of these types of solutions that need to be engaged in a cost-effective way. Now, somebody mentioned technology. All these models are models that have radicalized, fragmented, inefficient models. This is, what I'm about to propose is exactly the same process the banking sector went through in the late 1990s. It is the application, and this is the lesson of history as well, that you have a financial innovation, but what scales it is technology and legal frameworks. And you can talk about multi-stakeholder collaborations and value, but unless that plumbing is actually in place, you can't actually do it. And what have new economy models done? They have created a mechanism whereby that can be done. And I will argue, and I'll hopefully show you here, and I'm running short of time, so it'll be quick, there is an opportunity to do this. To make a multi-stakeholder collaboration, you have to have a legal structure that creates intra, and cross-country collaborations. So we move out of our silos. That exists. We can create that. It uses LLP structure. It works on legislation that we've worked and passed. And then you look at the value chain we go through, and as opposed to everybody reinventing that value chain, silo by silo, issue by issue, which is what we do at the moment, this technology, as Frederick will demonstrate, has all been built in the last 5 years. And then you would say, well, how do you measure it? Well, you don't go to conferences, which we all do, and think of the knowledge management process we go through. I was in Stockholm recently, 3,000 people chasing 50 people like Kathleen in 422 rooms. Nobody speaks to each other. The knowledge management process is back in the dark ages. Technology exists to solve that. Due diligence tools exist. Knowledge management tools, they're being used in various countries. So these tools exist in the private sector and can be applied to our sector. Then you would say, how would you measure it? Well, cloud mobile technology means that you can actually go down to the community. And as Frederick will far more sophisticatedly explain than me, you can create them to create the feedback. as opposed to somebody saying top down. You need to create a data mechanism that is not Stakhanovite and styloed that we do at the moment, but actually when you inject a dollar, you identify all the total externalities that you get. The lady said it before. Water is about women, it is about children, it's about education. We should be capturing all those values and identifying the externalities and paying, this is why I'm being a bit technical, by the delta of that improvement. And then you would say there are actually 5 values we can capture. We then capture the value of social entrepreneurship, the value of social finance. We capture the value of a cost structure as opposed to not everybody building it again. It then gives you the scale that you can inject a blended capital model. And you also recognize that in water and sanitation, the value is not in the fragmented economic models and trying to scale them. The value is actually in the social damage it creates. Water and sanitation creates roughly $500 million worth of damage every year. How about if we actually make that the tradable opportunity? So we create a financial tool that recognizes and captures the value of the individual innovation, its partnership inside a structure, and then also reflects the future cash flow lost to society. Ergo, you ask people to contingently pay, and you create a mechanism that would then create a security that would trade as a function of the total value of everything we do, both economic and social. How do you do that? I could explain perhaps afterwards, but essentially you take contingent payments, it creates an equity mechanism. You do this in a way that is a standard equity model. So you're creating an equity, tradable equity, as a function of the social improvement for every dollar you inject. And you can do that because technology now allows you to track granular value through complex systems. Back to my first chart. For profit, not for profit. No, what technology has done in the last 5 years is to give you the ability to create a granular legal structure, a granular financial structure, a granular metrics structure, and you can marry those together to mean that social value and all the value we create is actually a tradable opportunity. That is the opportunity for this sector. Now, am I at 150,000 feet? No, because this has been done in every other sector or has been done in every other sector of the economy. But believe me, it's not about setting up another institute to talk about the SDGs. It's about empowering the community. It's about driving from the bottom up. And it's about using modern innovation, legal, financial, and technology to achieve what we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you.